Let's start. Welcome, dear guests, people, activists, politicians, voices. Welcome to the European Parliament. It's time for the Freedom Drive. You started already yesterday, you arrived, some of you arrived on Sunday, and you were on the street today in Brussels. And welcome, let's say, to the most inaccessible city in the European Union. I have to start with the reality. And it's not easy, and you guys, you won the gold medal in the challenge of, pulling down, pushing down barriers as every day. And you and we have the privilege to be here. And welcome to you here in the room. And I know, or we know, and thanks for the support, people from outside, on the screen, internet, online world, they can watch the upcoming debate until 5 o'clock. So for 2 hours, we have the great opportunity to hear voices. And you see already our great guests here on the panel, on the podium. But you are the most important people here. My name is Katrin Langensiepen. I'm a member of the European Parliament since 2019 and now since summer 2024. And in the last period, we were 6 disabled MEPs. Now the official number I have, we are 3. What a privilege. You can say, I would say it's a shame that it's still in the 21st century almost impossible for disabled people from all the European countries to get the opportunity to raise their voice, to get the access to vote, to get elected, to have the right to vote. And maybe a little number, we disabled people, we are 100 million people in the European Union. When people say we are a small group and our rights are unimportant, I would say 100 million people, voices are not unimportant. And when we have the money and when we have the education and when we have the rights, we have the power. And I see so much power here in the room. I'm looking forward to have a great debate. I'm looking forward after to have a great party. And tomorrow I'm looking forward to have another huge demonstration. And let's take it as a chance, the opportunity to get connected. So many activists in the member states or different countries. We have people from Ukraine here. We have voices from Switzerland here. We have voices from Great Britain here, not really a member of the European Union, but you are here and you raise your voice. And it's not easy, always easy in your member state. And you are a lonely fighter sometimes. We use the opportunity here now to get connected, to empower ourselves, to raise our voice. Welcome, and I give the floor to ENIL, and thanks for hosting, organizing everything. Without you, we wouldn't be here, so the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrin. We wouldn't be here if in this room it wasn't for you. So we thank you very much for hosting this debate. My name is Jamie Bolling. I'm one of the co-chairs of the European Network on Independent Living. Yes, we're here and our voices are being heard. Thank you, freedom drivers. I think we made a lot of noise out there and we need to make even so much more. We were praised that our timing was good. It was really just fate. We have the Freedom Drive every other year, and we do it when the members of Parliament are here. But it is fantastic to be here in the first month of the new ones who have come, who haven't heard anything what we've had to say before, that have the strategy in front of them to be able to work with them. During the parade or the drive or the march, We talked about different things. We've heard that the sterilization that still goes on for women with disability, about the segregation, lack of support keeping people in their homes, our brothers and sisters who still, or who live or are locked away in the institutions, and there were so many more. We hope that the strategy will be strong and that we will be able to get across as strong points as possible. On our list of demands, which we'll take in more later, we do say that we don't want not one more cent to go to institutions. I don't want to be guilty of having my money go to fund for a brother or sister to be locked up. So our trip here is important. It's great that we are all to make the effort. I hope next time we're even more than we were this time, and we'll get on with the debate. I was going to talk a little bit about ENIL, but I'll leave that up to everybody who doesn't know who we are to look us up, enil.eu, to find out what are our demands if you don't hear them today, and to follow us and to support us so that we can continue to work and be strong. I will present Elena Kochoska from Macedonia, who will moderate the meeting today. Thank you, Helena.
Thank you, Jamie. First of all, thank to Katrin as our host and the one who has managed and lobbied all the doors in the parliamentarian yard and rooms to be opened for us today. And thanks to my comrades in ENIL that they have continued our fight for freedom, our fight for independence, and our fight for inclusive equality. That is something which is missing everywhere, on every corner, in our every day. We get together here for a reason. 35 years anniversary of our independence, our fight for independent living, for our movement, increasing our voices, increasing our norms and principles that are actually written in our main document, and that is the CRPD, Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disability. The first international agreement agreed among persons without disability and persons with disability. But unfortunately, as Ms. Katrin mentioned, in the 21st century, the human beings run by the community without disability are ready to land on the Mars. But unfortunately, the agreed principles of the CRPD somehow cannot land in any country. So that's why we are here, to discuss, to open the issues about our political participation, about equality, about non-discrimination, about sterilization, and about existing and maybe hiding ableism, that we don't want to speak a lot about it. Across the entire EU, as is mentioned and Jamie, we are facing with a lot of institutionalization, segregation, and actually we are just excluded from the mainstream society. We are treated as second-class citizens, living not just segregated lives, but with ableism, hidden from our homes, hidden by our parents, and placed in the group homes, and maybe what we'll say in my country is like, we are placing you in a Buckingham Palace. Every day, actually, we are opening a black page when we are talking about our rights. Page where we continuously just discussing about the principles framed in the CRPD. And that seems like a sad story at the end of the day. But that's why we are not giving up. That's why, and this, our gathering today, is just to reclaim our rights. And maybe remembering you what we have agreed in 2006. But to don't have a blank page, here I will call Florian, who has, with our fellows, give demands to the parliamentarians, but he will explain the same one to all of you. Please, Florian.
I will proceed with presenting our freedom rights demands very shortly, but before that, thank you. Don't applaud too soon. Maybe your presentation is not good. I would like to give the floor to Member of the European Parliament, Gabrielle Bischoff, who is here to address you.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome in the House of European Democracy here. And I have to say it's a great view to see you here from above all in our House of Democracy and debating with us. And I see a lot of colleagues also from the Parliament sitting here and looking forward to the exchange. Indeed, my name is Gabi Bischoff. I am the Vice President of the group of the S&D, the Socialists and Democrats, and I'm also a very active member with Katrin and others and Marc in the Employment and Social Committee and fighting there for equality. And I have to say also here, when we look what we achieved in the last period, then I have to say I'm proud of this in many different areas. I'm sure Katrin already talked about it. I know Marc, who was rapporteur, will also talk about the work. But I will also tell you that the question really of strengthening the rights of persons with disability is not limited to social and economic policy. One thing we did in the last period, and I'm also a member of the Committee on Constitutional Affairs, was that we came up with a proposal for a new electoral act, and that there, for the first time, we did not come up only with proposals how we can strengthen democracy, but an essential part was that we still have a lot of electoral barriers for the active and passive right, and we came up with proposals how the member states have to change it for European elections. And we still have to push for this because it's stuck in the Council since then, but really to make sure that in this House it is not only Katrin and a few colleagues also as candidates, but also to make sure that every citizen can vote independently and that we reduce the barriers is very important. And I have to say that also in this area, the work we do as parliamentarians together with the NGOs, with organizations like many of you are here, is very essential to be successful in the end. Because we are doing legislation, but we also need the pressure of society and within society so that we can get things moving here. And there, I think also the work we did on the disability card, I'm someone that likes things that are very concrete. You know, we can talk about equality, but really concrete progress, concrete social progress. And for me, this is also something that we can be proud of. Okay, we would have liked it to be even better. Yeah. I agree with that. But also we have to see that we came one big step forward, and it's also a step forward in Europeanization, in integration, and this is why we should take it as a success, but not become lazy afterwards, but continue to see that it is well implemented, but also that we see this as a starting point here, and that especially one of my topics is also mobility within Europe. And here we still have a lot to do regarding social rights, but also that we can transfer our rights and that we don't have barriers to free movement to anyone. And here I think we still have a lot to do to improve social rights here and to make it possible for everyone also to use the free movement as one of the really concrete things that Europe offers its citizens. And you are coming at a time where we are discussing at the moment in the different committees what are our key demands as political groups, but also as committees for the new Commission. And when I look at the mission letters, it's quite, I would say, austere. I think there is still a lot to debate and to fight for. So we are looking forward also to the exchange. What are your priorities for the next 5 years here? We have some positions, but also to engage in discussions here so that we can make sure also in the next 5 years we can deliver and can keep the promise that Europe gives to its citizens, independent where they come from, independent if they have disabilities, independent what language they speak or whom they love, that Europe is here to improve your living and working conditions in concrete terms, not just in words, and to continue here. So to keep up the fight together here for equality, for better rights, and for the right of everyone to have a good life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bischoff. Thank you that you have mentioned that it's very important to strengthen the democracy, the integration. But also if we go in line and what Ms. Katrin has mentioned, as a large minority in the world, we, persons with disability, probably it's time to think how to create a mechanism for equitable representation in every institution. We have that mechanisms for minorities, but when it's come for the largest one, then somehow we are lost. And in that sense, I will call on Ms. Marc Angel, deputy, who has participated in the Commission in the process of enacting legislation to respond to tackle the homophobia. So in that sense, I will want to ask him, do we need some kind of a united and decisive legislative response to tackle ableism in Europe and outside of Europe? And what actions can you suggest in the light of CRPD that can be found in the EU Disability Strategy 30?
Thank you. Thank you very much to the European Network on Independent Living for inviting me here and welcome here. Just would like to make a first remark. When Katrin mentioned that we had 6 members only in the last mandate, persons with a disability, and now only 3, this reminds me that we have to do efforts in our political parties back home in our member states to make our parties more inclusive, to make our parties more diverse. I think this is a first step also. Gabi already mentioned what the Parliament had made to have better legislation on election organizing, but also as political parties, we really must step up, because I was shocked now when Katrin told me this number, how people with disabilities are represented amongst the members of the European Parliament. Another subject I would like to tell you, we've been very busy also working for intersectional discrimination here. Intersectionality is a word that some member states and the Council, they don't like that word. They want to get it out of the different legislations. And it's something we have to fight when it comes to defend persons with disability, when it is about women's rights, when it's about LGBTI rights. This is something we are very much committed to. And then another introductory remark I want to make is, we know you've been really strong. We've heard you already for many years. We know one sentence which is so important, and most MEPs know it: no sense for closed institutions. This is something we have branded in our mind, but there we need you also. If you notice in your member states, that's a message I give you, the NGOs from the member states. If you see that some European funds are misused, you must tell us, because we have oversight on the budget, and I think this is very important. On the international level, we see it's becoming more and more conservative in several levels, and I think we have to also try to find like-minded countries outside the European Union on other continents to defend your cause, to fight against all those who want to divide us and discriminate us, put us into groups and put people one against the other. So this is something, if we defend democracy, I think we defend also your cause and attacking people with disabilities, attacking LGBTI community, attacking women who fight for women's rights, it's attacking democracy. And this is where we have to, on the international level, counter all these movements, because they have a common agenda, dividing us and not working for the people, but working for their own interests. I think what a challenge for the next mandate is also to finally unblock the horizontal anti-discrimination directive. This is a huge challenge. The last presidency, the Belgian presidency, was working very hard on it. We were very close, and I really hope that Poland, the next presidency after Hungary, and then Denmark, that we finally can unblock this very important legislation. It's time. It is, and this is something I think we will all fight for. There is a fantastic disability intergroup also here in the Parliament. Katrin, you're very active there, and this is something we have to really push. And also, when we are now coming to the hearings with commissioners, we have to do that. It's a bit of pity that the mission letters. This is what the President von der Leyen gives to the different commissioners, what their mission will be. First of all, we don't have a Commissioner for Equality anymore, which is only Commissioner for Equality, and the mission letter is 1 page. And, you know, discrimination, there has a lot of faces, and it needs more than 1 page. And I think already disability would need 2 pages, and then all the other grounds of discrimination. And this is something we promise you we will also fight for in the next weeks. And then the last thing is also the right for fair paid work, inclusive and well accessible workplaces. Katrin did this fantastic report, which you all know, where we say we have to phase out of sheltered workshops and have people with disability on the market. We need to also invest more in social economy, in a social economy where we can create excellent working places. And I was a shadow rapporteur in the directive of pay transparency, and I'm very proud that we managed to put an article on, to put also in the text, in the recitals, the intersectional discrimination. And also I was co-rapporteur of the equality bodies directives to strengthen equality bodies in the member states, to make them more, to give them more means and to make them more independent, even more independent as they are, and to give them more power also to defend you in the courts, to go with you, to make court cases. I think this is also important. And also in that directive, we made sure, and there we also got it in the recitals, but also in the articles, that the concept of intersectional discrimination. And this is something we have to continue working on that. Having said that, it's wonderful to be here, to listen to you. At a certain moment, I will have to leave because we will have, I'm receiving some activists from Bulgaria, LGBT activists, where they have a new terrible law, and I have to see them. But we are with you. We need you. Civil society is the best ally of a politician, and civil society is not our enemy, but it is our ally, and together we can move things, but only together. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Angel, and thank you for highlighting the issue about the intersectional discrimination. But we need to be also aware that somehow in the existing processes of fighting the intersectional discrimination, again, disability is somehow losing. So we are fighting, or somehow we are creating different bubbles for gender, for LGBT, but within those bubbles, disability again is missing. And it's very important about the working employment, dignity employment of persons with disability, because without decent work, we cannot have independent and dignity lives. So those are very also important. And also I want to thank you that you have mentioned the issue about the cooperation and alliance with the organizations of persons with disability, but also we should not forget, at least you as a politicians, that our best alliance or your best alliance will be if your comrades or fellows in the political party are persons with disabilities. And somehow, because we have a little bit get out from the prepared or defined agenda, we have used the reasonable accommodation without any request, but now we are returning on the formal defined agenda, and the floor I'm giving to Florian, who will present the demands that were sent to the parliamentarians. Please, Florian.
Yes, thank you, Elena, for giving me the floor. It was already mentioned a couple of times, EU disability policy is at the more critical juncture than many people think. We have had a number of signs right from the top which were not so encouraging. There is not going to be any standalone portfolio for equality. There will be no commissioner working, focusing on equality specifically. The portfolio has been merged with other topics. Already in the political program, there was no mention of disability directly, and the European Union is working on a so-called regulation on the protection of vulnerable adults, which really focuses heavily on guardianship and deprivation of legal capacity concept, which is not UN CRPD compliant, and the former special rapporteur and also disability scholars have already commented on that. But the good thing is there's always a possibility to turn things around. Next spring, the European Commission will permit us to propose more initiatives to be included under the European Strategy on Rights for Persons with Disabilities. And we will certainly make use of this, and we hope that we will get some ambitious initiative. An area which I would like to highlight especially is funding. We are in a situation where we are still spending the bulk of our resources on services which are not only not helpful but downright harmful and segregationist and discriminatory. I'm speaking about institutions or sheltered workshops. Why is this a problem? I would like to quote the concluding observations on the combined second and third periodic reports on Belgium. The committee is concerned about reports that persons with disabilities in institutions, including residential care institutions and psychiatric institutions, have a substantially lower life expectancy than the general population. Full stop. Do we really need more evidence? I'm asking. I personally also know people who have been institutionalized, and it is unbearable to see how they have been scared for life by these experiences. What do we need? To end our reliance on such services, we need a shift. We need substantially higher investments into the personal budget and personal assistance. Personal assistance is a form of support that allows the disabled person to be control over the people that help them, but also the way in which support is provided. Personal budgets are an essential part of that, since they permit the beneficiary to pay their assistance themselves, making it clear that they are the boss, not the other way around. Centers of independent living and personal assistance user cooperatives provide help in working with personal assistance and personal budgets. These services could bring us a long way in making progress in deinstitutionalization, help people leave institutions, but also help disabled people who are not in institutions but need more help in leading their lives and leading healthy lives. How are we doing when it comes to funding? research by ENIL and also others has found that the European Social Fund and the European Fund for Regional Development and the Resilience, the Recovery and Resilience Facility invest heavily in the construction and reservation of institutions and sheltered workshops. And of course, these resources are then missing and funding the services we need. In the past years, ENIL documented many cases and submitted complaints to the Commission. Unfortunately, the follow-ups were not always helpful. I would like to remind that in 2022, the EU Ombudsman investigated the issue and officially concluded that yes, the follow-up by the Commission to such complaints is often insufficient. And it also found that there is the view that spending on segregating services can be permitted as long as it is of a transitional nature. And this position is not helpful at all, since there is no definition of what transition means. It is basically a transition without ending. And we find it is commonly used to put off taking steps towards more person-centered services in favor of maintaining a system which is really old and it has failed. The good news is that the European Union is also funding 2 pilot projects on personal assistance in Portugal and Greece. We need more of those, but we also need projects which are UN CRPD compliant, which is not always the case. We are waiting at the moment a document called Guidance on Independent Living, which the European Commission will produce. And for this document, which is still in the making, we're calling on the Commission to send really a clear message that we need a shift in the distribution of EU funding and that funding of institutions is never allowed, also not in the transitional nature, and that these resources have to go to personal assistance and the personal budget. It is quite simple, really. EU-funded projects on personal assistance have to follow the proper concepts as introduced by the UNCPD and need to be co-produced with disabled people. Also, the document needs to have a proper legal standing so that member states actually have to work with it. A pure guidance document will not really help us. Paper is patient. From the next year on, we will discuss the future multi-annual financial framework. And this process must produce reformed regulations governing EU funds, so it really becomes impossible to block the changes we need. Because at the moment, unfortunately, this is not entirely guaranteed legally. But focusing on EU funding alone is not enough, because the bulk of spending on disability services comes from member states' budgets, from subsidies paid to providers, and from social security. Now, it is a long-standing taboo in EU disability policy to address this, but it is time to break this taboo to have real change. The phrase "there is no competence" has served for too long as an excuse for inaction. The EU has extensive competences when it comes to regulating state aid, public procurement, and it has an obligation to mainstream the UNCPD. So we need to see that we can also, in this legislation, bring in the UNCPD perspective and have safeguards against investments into the wrong channels and redirect the resources. Just want to mention the regulation on services on general economic interests and the general block exemption regulation. But we need to also take into account funding coming from regular social security. At the moment, there's a broad coalition of social NGOs led by the Social Platform advocating for an EU directive on joint standards on minimum income schemes. And those NGOs are certain that such legislation is permitted by the treaties. And if this is the case, why can't we have a directive on joint standards for the personal budget? Personal budgets are a type of social security, same as the minimum income, and thus should fall within the same remit of EU competence. Such a directive could oblige all EU countries to introduce the personal budget nationwide, design them in a way that they are CRPD compliant, and make them viable to actually work in practice. I know. Yes, we will advocate for these initiatives to be included in the European strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities. I would say we have our work cut out for us. We need to brave, but let us boldly go where no one in EU disability policy has gone before. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian. A lot of work in front of us, and of course for the politicians who all these demands need to shape in the European Disability Rights Agenda in the next 5 years. But as you have mentioned, need to breathe in the CRPD principles, otherwise everything again will be lost, and again we will need to start from the scratch. But as we are here in the Parliament, today we actually, with Florian, has focused and given the 2 panel discussions that we will discuss today, you and we together. We have 2 pillars dedicated on the independent living in the EU in the light of the CRPD, through the EU strategy, and of course actions that need to promote the right for independent living, but through the global actions. As we are in the Parliament, we have a lot of rules. Of course, probably we will change when we will be part of them, but at this moment we have to respect them. You know how that is going. I'm giving you a word, and I will take you at the word. That's how the democratic processes are going. So in the light of that, every speaker has, the following speakers will have approximately 6 minutes to address. And of course, in the democratic processes, everyone has a right to say a word. So after the speakers, I will give you a word where you can address to us, open a questions, or give some opinion. So, because everyone has agreed, yes, we have a green card, we can continue and open the first panel discussion, focusing on the actions needed to protect the right to independent living in the EU. So here with me, considering the actions and answering these questions, I have excellent speakers. Here with me is Mr. Markus Schefer, member of the CRPD committee and the rapporteur for the European Union. Dr. Mr. Teodor Mladenov is coming from the University of Dundee, and he is coordinator of the Independent Living Research Network at ENIL. And here with us is also Ms. Edwina Gouder, Ministry of Inclusion and the Voluntary Sector from Malta. So European Union is the first union has ratified CRPD. We have a lot of other countries and outside of EU that has ratified the convention. But now we will focus on the EU and follow a report by the CRPD to the European Union. And can you tell us actually, Mr. Markus, what actions or what questions will be asked to the European Union considering Article 19? How the follow-up will be? What recommendation can we expect in the next year, in March? And can we see at least one measure like forming a commission for truth if we are following the guidelines from the deinstitutionalization? Please.
Thank you, Elena. Thanks, everybody, for coming here. I have to sorely disappoint you. I won't be able to tell you what we're going to ask the EU in our dialogue, and I will certainly not going to be telling you what the concluding observations will be, because that's going to be the end of the process. So I was asked first to say a few words about the obligations the EU incurred by ratifying the convention. When it ratified the convention in 2010, it incurred all the obligations that every other state that ratified the convention also incurred. And we've heard it, they're only limited to the degree that the EU does not have a competence to do something. That doesn't mean that our committee is only going to ask whether those actions that the EU have taken are compliant with the CRPD. We will also ask which actions the EU could have taken but didn't, and which it could have taken in order to implement the CRPD. And that's a big difference. So Article 19 here on independent living is the main provision. We've heard quite a lot about it. I would draw your attention to 4 different obligations here. First, end institutionalization. That is one of the main goals of Article 19. And at the same time, provide support measures, build up support structures that persons with disabilities can live in the community like everybody else can. Those 2 obligations go together, and we've heard it takes time. The committee acknowledges that it takes time. But that doesn't mean that transitory periods last forever. You need a plan. You need a plan with time frames, with budgets, with competences, with monitoring. That is important. Committee has issued these such views before. Then there's an obligation to raise awareness about deinstitutionalization. First, what does it mean? In many member states, and I would assume also in the EU, not everybody realizes what an institution is and what it means to live in the community. The EU needs to raise awareness on this. Article 8 is mandatory. And then, in all of these processes, Article 4.3 of the Convention requires the EU to closely consult and actively involve persons with disabilities through their representative organizations. That means not just ad hoc ask a couple of people whom you know will tell you what you want to hear, but to systematically entrench such procedures for the consultation of organizations of persons with disabilities. Very important, particularly in the area of deinstitutionalization. So much on the obligations. We could go on and on. Read the respective general comment and our guidelines on it. You'll find a lot of stuff that is important there. Now, this March, the EU will be reviewed by the CRPD committee in Geneva. This is new for everybody. It's the EU, even though it has a formidable bureaucracy, does not have the experience to deal with treaty bodies. You've only had one review about close to 10 years ago. Member states, regular states, have reporting obligations maybe to 8 different treaty bodies. They know how these things work. The EU don't. So it's a challenge for them. It's a challenge, and this I would like to stress here, it's a challenge for organizations of persons with disabilities. You really need to organize yourselves and coordinate your actions. It's crucially important. If you inundate us, the committee, with tons of alternative reports, that might happen. We won't be able to process it. You need to organize yourselves. And then it's difficult for us in the committee, because we usually don't have to worry about whether a state party has a competence to do something or not. And here we will. So it's a challenge for everybody. It's going to be 3 members of the committee who will be assigned to the task force of this review. I will be the coordinator of this task force, and I'm very much looking forward to the job of reviewing the EU. Where is the process now? We've issued a so-called list of issues to the EU. The list of issues was compiled based on your reports, based on our research, and it asked to the EU the various open questions that we still had based on the material in front of us. The EU answered this list of issues. What will happen now is mid-January, we will start the 3 members assigned to this review, we will start reading everything that you and the EU and anybody else provides to us. So please make sure that your reports get in by mid-January. The earlier, the better, because we need time to prepare the session. And the later you come with your report, the less likely it is that it will really have an impact, because we just will not be able to process it if it comes too late. So we will start with that, and we will also, sometime in February, start with informal meetings with organizations of persons with disabilities online. The 3 task force members will, together with the Secretariat, will hold online meetings with you. Organize yourselves so we can have meaningful discussions in these online meetings. And then, at the beginning of March, we will be in session in Geneva. And then we will have, again, informal meetings in Geneva with organizations of persons with disabilities in order to get the last questions out of the way. We will have a formal meeting with you. Please organize yourselves very carefully and focus on the issues you really want to drive home, and make sure that none of your participants blabbers on and wastes time. Then the constructive dialogue with the state party will take place. That's 6 hours. These 6 hours will be divided into 3 parts, and each part will be, I would say, driven by one of the task force members, but with the help of others. We have a new system of conducting these dialogues. In the past, the committee would ask all the questions, and then the state party would answer a couple of them, those that they liked answering. We now have a system where we ask a question, we get an immediate answer from the state party, and then we can ask a follow-up question if you are not satisfied. 5:43. So I have 15 seconds, I think. So in the end, we will have the concluding observations, and these organizations of persons with disabilities can use them as advocacy tools. They don't transform into reality by themselves. They only become reality if you make the most out of it, and if the EU take them seriously. Their legal obligations they incurred, it's our interpretations of the legal obligations they incurred, and I would hope the EU takes them seriously, as they promised when they ratified the convention. I'm looking very much forward to it. We cannot work without organizations of persons with disabilities. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll probably see next March.
Thank you very much, and mentioning the challenges that we will face, all of us, including the CRPD committee, organizations of persons with disability, and of course the institution and European Union. I'm very glad that you have mentioned public awareness. That is leading us to something that we are actually facing every day, probably, when we are requesting our rights. Misunderstanding of CRPD, or when you knock on the door of the politicians, they will say, oh, what was that? Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disability. So that is leading me to Mr. Mladenov, to ask him, What does ENIL actually see as the main challenges going forward, and how we should overcome this misunderstanding of the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability, and misunderstanding when the institution need to implement the obligation considering the right for independent living. Then we have different approaches or something else, but how does you're seeing as a...
Yes, thank you, Elena. I have to be quick because time is ticking already. And I've prepared for 8 minutes. I have 6 minutes, so I'm a bit under pressure now. Yes, I would like to talk about misinterpretations and misappropriations of the convention. I mean, the convention is a wonderful thing. We all know this. It has been a major achievement of the struggle for independent living. We have Article 19. We have General Comment number 5. We have the UN guidelines on deinstitutionalization. And even there is an even more profound reason why the convention is so wonderful. There is a profound philosophical reason why the convention is so good from the perspective of independent living. And this reason is that it's precisely the basic ideas of the independent living movement that have underpinned the convention. As clearly stated in the official guidelines, the convention represents a paradigm shift in disability policy, and this paradigm shift boils down to the promotion of disabled people's self-determination as an alternative to their treatment as objects of care. So in other words, the convention taken as a whole and in depth, and not only in its preamble and its Article 19, reflects a shift from the paradigm of care to the paradigm of self-determination, basically. As the great Adolf Ratzka stated in one of his last interviews, we, the advocates of the independent living, see our language reflected in the convention. It's our language, our values, our basic ideas. However, although the convention has been this major achievement of the independent living movement, it has not been a decisive achievement, and far from it. The convention has not been a decisive achievement because, as we also know, there is still a lot of work to be done to translate the convention's provisions into genuine independent living policies. And what is less obvious is, and less often discussed, is that a great deal of this work on implementing the convention, the Disability Convention, is nowadays about fighting misappropriations and misinterpretations of the convention and its specific provisions. Actually, the mainstreaming of the convention, of the Disability Convention, has in some cases made it more difficult for independent living activists to achieve genuine independent living policies. And this is because the activists now must fight not only for independent living policies, but they also must fight against an increasing number of policies that are branded as independent living policies, but that have nothing to do with independent living policies. So the fight now is developing on two fronts, as it were. The reason for this is that the provisions of the convention are subject to interpretation, and the interpretations of the independent living movement often clash with interpretations of others and more powerful stakeholders in the process, and stakeholders that have diverging interests, and these are service providers, caring professionals, and public authorities. And let me provide two examples from ENIL's work. First, the continuing institutional care that is now routinely misrepresented as services in the community. We see this everywhere. ENIL's monitoring of the use of the European structural funds shows that millions of euros have been and continue to be invested in renovating existing institutions or building small institutions under the banner of deinstitutionalization and in fake compliance with Article 19 of the Disability Convention. And another example, what is called personal assistance in many European countries nowadays often amounts to different types of home care, very restricted and in some cases presenting barriers to independent living, paradoxically. So misrepresenting institutions as community-based services and misrepresenting home care as personal assistance helps imitate compliance with the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in cases where there is no such compliance. With the adoption and incorporation in some cases of the Convention, the mainstreaming of disability rights has actually intensified the struggle for independent living. Progressive disability policies have never been more settled on paper, yet more contested in policy making and in implementation. It's a paradoxical kind of situation, but this is what we're having now. I'm out of time. Can I have 30 more seconds? Okay, thank you. What policy makers interested in promoting independent living can do in this situation to help with this situation of misinterpretations and misappropriations is to prioritize the expertise of independent living organizations in translating the Convention's provisions into genuine independent living policies. ENIL has already produced a great amount of materials that can help the policymakers to stay on the right track, and this includes ENIL's position papers and mythbusters and surveys and reports. So my call, and I finish with this, my call to policymakers is very simple, and it kind of works very well with what we already heard from the other speakers. It is to take these resources and the expertise of independent living activists seriously, and this is the expertise needed to make genuine deinstitutionalization, genuine personal assistance, and ultimately genuine independent living a reality for disabled people in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mladenov. From your address, we can see that the future will be very easy for us, especially for community with disability. We still need to clarify our positions. So instead of probably human rights, we should talk about politics and funds and money. A lot of us, we have mentioned the process of the institutionalization. In every country has started this process, but unfortunately out from the frames and principles defined in the CRPD and Article 19. Some of those examples and practices, what is happening, here we have a representative from Malta, Ms. Edwina Gouder. She will explain the practice in Malta considering the process of the institutionalization and the challenges that they are faced in. And probably you will present us steps or recommendations that we will need to send to the European Union in the light of the new phase of the European Disability Strategy, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you. First of all, it's a privilege being here. As I was introduced, I'm Edwina. I work for the Ministry for Inclusion and Voluntary Sector in Malta. And I will explain, I will go through various initiatives that as a country, we have taken steps since we ratified the UN CRPD in 2012. So, as I said, my presentation, so yes, my presentation will be about actions to protect independent living in the EU and the Maltese experience. Next slide, please. First, when we actually ratified the UN CRPD in Malta, we needed legislative reforms. So we needed to ratify most of our disability main acts because we had to see that the proper structures are in place to start implementing the objectives of the UN CRPD. So that was our first starting point. Next slide, please. Okay. Next slide. So the structures we currently have in place now are, first and foremost, our Disability Equality Body, which is the CRPD in Malta, so the Commission for the Rights of Persons with Disability. We have our national agency, Agencia Support, which is a national agency to provide disability services in Malta. And then we have the national focal point, which is the Directorate for Disability Issues, together with Engage. Engage is a civil society forum, so we have persons with disability working hand in hand with us as a directory, part of this directorate, to guide us through each and every policy development and reform that we need. So it's not just consulting persons, disabled persons, but also giving them the power to change anything. So any law in Malta that, disability law, that needs to go to Parliament, disabled people have their say in it before that reaches Parliament. So that was a major change from our end, which has totally changed the way how we worked. Next slide, please. Another thing that was necessary in Malta, we didn't have a strategy. So in 2021, also when the EU developed and launched its own strategy, Malta launched the Freedom to Live strategy, which is available online, both in Maltese, English, and easy-to-read version, for people to see where the disability sector in Malta is going. So these are all, our objectives, where we are going for the next 10 years. Obviously, next slide, please. We have aligned this roadmap with the same objectives of the UN CRPD and the EU Disability Strategy. Next slide, please. And also the UN Sustainable Developmental Goals and the Dundee framework. Next slide, please. As I start to working on deinstitutionalization, our Commission for the Rights of Persons with Disability started off with a research study of what was happening in Malta, where we want to start with the deinstitutionalization. How are we going to do it? That was an important research that was launched and which gave both national authorities and service providers recommendations to work on. It didn't stop there. Next slide, please. It didn't stop there. We have also our federation, Malta Federation of Organizations for Persons with Disability, carried out a study on personal assistance for people with disability, and gave us a number of recommendations of where the challenges are, what we need to improve. We do have a system of personal assistance, but this needs improvement. So the Federation has launched this study and gave us all the recommendations that were required. Next slide, please. Our national service provider, Agencia Support, is leading the personal assistance reform. Agencia Support is currently working with MFOPD, our Federation for Organizations of Persons with Disability, local stakeholders, and also ENIL in this reform. So currently, this is work going on, and our main guidance is obviously the UN CRPD, the institutionalization guidelines that were issued. In 2023, the Agencia Support also launched a public consultation on the reform. So, we had to be as wide as possible, and we wanted people to give their opinions about this reform. What is working, what is not working. Next slide, please. Agencia Support also needed to create a culture change in the systems that that currently are in place. So it needed to see that staff understand what the institutionalization is, what restructuring they need to do, stop opening new residential settings, and focus on what support do disabled people need to live independently. This was a big challenge. Obviously, the organization accommodates more than 300, 400 people. So if the staff are not understanding what DI, the institutionalization is, then we will have problems in implementing what we are trying to change. At the same time, the agency is also working with NGOs to implement this reform.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Sorry. Can I just finish off with the recommendations?
But we don't have a time because we have to start the next panel session. Sorry. I should act as a German do, sorry. It's very important that you have mentioned the cooperation and networking with organizations of persons with disability in the process of the institutionalizations. Not just as a partners, I think it's very important organizations and persons with disability to be active in the process of the institutionalization, but also in the process of creating, managing and financing, because we are also able to do management with the finance and funds considering the process of the institutionalization. Before we go to the next panel session, as we have agreed at the beginning, I'm calling you if you have some suggestions, opinion or a question to our panelists to address. Please be briefly and short. If someone has an interest, just raise a hand. Yes?
170. And then...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, yes. I had some questions with regards to the engaged structures in Malta. I was really interested in how that's set up and whether there was any challenges there. And really specifically, I was interested in understanding how that was funded, whether there was funds distributed to the civil society and the specific disabled people who co-produced on that, whether you have any guidance to other countries who would like to set those sorts of systems up in the future. Thank you.
Before we answer, can we have another one who has a question or...
Okay, very shortly, in the discussion about deinstitutionalization, people who don't believe in deinstitutionalization, DI, okay, often come with the argument of freedom of choice. So they say parents and persons with a disability need to have a freedom of choice, and we must respect the choice. If the choice is to live in an institution, we must provide this possibility. So my question is how to tackle this and how to make reference to the UN Convention if they bring up this argument, because the UN Convention is about freedom of choice.
Thank you very much. Very interesting questions. Okay, here we have a girl.
Hello, everyone. Two of the panelists has encouraged us to make reports about the misuse of funds. From my experience, I am the Secretary General of the Greek Organization for Independent Living, It is very difficult to make a report because the current government and maybe all of the next ruling parties will stop collaborate with our organization, and then we miss any chance to promote things. On the other hand, why do we need to report things, since it's very clear that a fund is for building a segregating setting, let's say for a group home, although it is meant to be used for the institutionalization. And I would like to know if, do you have any example that the report was made and something really changed, because I don't know internationally of any example of this change. And one last thing, a panelist suggested us to be more organized. Well, I was traveling for 13 hours yesterday to reach Brussels from Greece, and I'm not here to listen to that kind of advice, to be more organized, my organization to be more organized. I'm here just to learn about how you can protect and promote our rights. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So, just a question as well about, someone said about the EU, like that all the countries had ratified it, but Ireland hasn't ratified the optional protocol. So would there be any way for the EU to actually push Ireland to do that? And also on deinstitutionalisation, again, that's a big problem at home. And could the EU actually do something like Europe-wide to help to push countries to actually encourage independent living in the community, like for legislation, so that they can have domestic legislation as well as comply with the EU when it comes to disabled people living independently, because that's an issue that needs to be tackled at home, but it should be tackled nationwide as well. And I'm pretty sure Ciarán Woolley will actually agree with me on that one. We need to ratify the optional protocol, so I think the EU should actually push Ireland to actually do that.
Hi, my name's Simone Aspis from Inclusion London Free Our People campaign. I think when we do this, we need to look beyond Article 19. We need full implementation of UN CRPD, because just focusing on personal assistance isn't going to ultimately improve disabled people's lives. We need to make sure that when we are campaigning, that we're not campaigning just for personal assistance, but campaigning for equality and inclusion in leisure opportunities, in employment opportunities, education opportunities, political participation. You know, we've put 33 articles together from the UNCRPD. We need them all. We need to be focusing on all of them, because they all are about promoting our independent living. And we must never forget that independent living isn't just about having personal assistance, because that's where the challenge is, because that's all the focus will be on. Well, we'll provide you with a personal assistant, we'll provide you a support worker, but we won't focus on whether you can get into a building. We won't focus whether you'll get into a mainstream school, or whether you'll get into a mainstream club, whether you want to join, you know, the local theatre, or you know, and support your rights to get married, to have children. So the message has to be that if we're going to talk about right to independent living, it's not just Article 19, because otherwise we'll end up having institutionalisation in the community, which is people just being at home with PAs.
Thank you very much to spread and elaborate the right for independent living. We have another one, and then we will give the panelists to answer some of your questions.
Yeah, it works. Okay, good. I just want to point something out and also ask a question at the same time. I will be very quick. I personally believe that it's kind of abrasive to have all of you speak at us instead of actually giving us more time to speak. And my question is, what will you actually, what are your actual plans? Do you plan to do anything after you leave here, or is this just for fun?
Thank you. This is very open and honest. So can we start with Edwina and the process of the institutionalization, please?
Yes, so the committee called Engage is part of our national law. So it is an advisory committee to the ministry, and it's where all the laws and policies go through this committee for vetting, and then, you know, through the stages of Parliament and, you know, committee and all that. Thank you.
What about the freedom of choice and use as excuse if someone of... Yeah, please, Mladen.
Yeah. There is no choice when institutionalization is so prevalent, both in traditional institutions and in other forms, and when there are no community supports available, and where ableism is hegemonic, so that there is no choice in this situation. So this would be my answer to this question.
Okay. Thank you. Florian?
Yeah, I mean, just earlier I quoted the concluding observations for Belgium, which said, I repeat that living in institution leads to a substantially lower life expectancy than the general population. Yes. What more can I say to provide evidence that, yeah, I don't know, calling this freedom of choice seems perverse. Sorry. Second, what are we going to do after that? I cannot speak for all the panelists, but I mentioned quite a number of policy projects I'm aiming to pursue probably for the next 10 to 20 years. I don't think much of this will be short term. So, yeah, in ENIL we will have next year again a policy working group where you can participate. This was just to kickstart a long-term work. Yeah.
Florian?
Maybe some words about funding. We will have the hearings of the new commissioners, and that is where we can, let's say, set them under fire, that they give a clear position on what about funding and institutions, or they're against social standards. We negotiated the minimum wage, and it was a hard fight to get a little sentence, minimum wage for persons in sheltered workshops. Are we here for talking? We are here to be together, and nothing new. Everyone who's against the institutions get a huge wave and smash into the face. They threat you, they spit on you, they fight for the system. Argumentation, people are so happy in the institutions. I tried to split it. I tried to split and say, first of all, we are talking about persons in sheltered workshops. Let's start with that. They are working for companies, and I'm from Germany, and the holy, holy institution is a place you don't question. 10 years ago, I wasn't even allowed to question it. Now we have a start of debate. That is the point where we are, sorry to say. And when people are so happy putting screws into plastic bags, it's not my job to criticize it in the European Parliament, but I want to have that they have a minimum wage, that they can live from it. I don't criticize the job, but I criticize the standards. I criticize the commune and say no money more for communes or for levels in your country, that there's no bus station. No, we in my region, we stopped implementing special schools. We phased the system out in Lower Saxony. So that was a hard fight. And 10 years ago, it wasn't even possible. So funding, money, awareness, sorry to say, that is our job again and again, and being solidar. How many disabled people love the situation where they are and not are really, let's say, on our critical side? Education, empowerment, and media, we need to be solidar with the others. Where are black people? Where are the women's rights movement? Where are supporters? It's not only us bringing the old to the place or how we say it. There is still a long way to go in the House. We have to be aware of, Commissioner, what's your plan when it comes to budget?
Thank you very much. So I will ask my great panelists to replace with the new composition of panelists that will address on the next session. Let's say again, thanks to all of them. And call Miss Elena Conturi-Tepiere, Miss Ioana Dermanin, Miss Julia Sachuk, Mr. Gordon Retrey, Mr. Elias Matthews, and also the deputies, Mr. Florian Mololu and Mr. Willy Sondel. Until they sit, I will just give a short intro about the new panel session. New rules or a game without rules? I think that this formula accurately describes the historic turning point we have reached today and the choice we are facing as a disability community. There is nothing new, of course, in the idea that the world is changing very fast. It's certainly hard not to notice that dramatic transformation in the global politics and the economy, public and political life, in the industry, information and social technologies, climate changes, security and peace, etc. But those challenges, the centers of power are overcoming with different processes and mechanisms. In that line, when we are talking and when the politicians and centers of power are thinking to overcome this, they are creating different agreements. So we have Berlin process, we have EU approximation process, not to forget, of course, and the G7 summit, which is very important, who is directing or predicting our new democracy processes. But if we observe from the CRPD, something always staying in the clouds. The disability community, again, has been vanished, or the principles of CRPD are just slightly mentioned in the margins. Maybe the international relations must be based on the international law frame, but based on our CRPD principles. Perhaps most important is to respect for one's partners and their interests. This is an obvious formula, but simply following it cloud radically changes in the global situation. At the moment, the goal of reaching global equilibrium is turning into a difficult puzzles where the postulated equation, in the postulated equation, disability doesn't exist. Therefore, what is the role of the EU in the Europe and globally, and the opportunities and responsibilities that brings in the terms of independent living through the global action and the already started processes in the meaning of EU approximation process, Berlin process, Warsaw, G7, and etc. For those questions or challenges, we have excellent panelists. I will not announcing them again, but I will start to give the panelists a speech. From your panel perspective, Ms. Elena, where does OHCHR see as the biggest role for the EU globally in terms of disability rights? What actions should be included in the next part of the disability strategy to improve CRPD implementation globally, and what action you will propose to have? For example, how to mainstream and to have disability focal points in every UN entities and other bodies on the international and national level. Again, the rules are the same. Please, start.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. First of all, allow me to warmly thank the European Network on Independent Living and Member of Parliament, Katrin, for creating this important opportunity at the start of the legislative term to discuss priorities for the disability rights agenda. This is my first Freedom Drive, and I'm really delighted to be here today amongst so many dedicated disability rights activists and human rights defenders from across Europe. There is a sense of excitement that we are at the beginning of something new, a new political cycle, a new college of commissioners, new opportunities, and certainly also challenges for human rights. The European Union is a powerful force for human rights, both within its borders and in its external action. The EU's ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities as the first and only regional entity to do so is testament to the Union's commitment to equality and inclusion of persons with disabilities. We have heard quite a bit in the first panel on the different competencies between the European Union and member states, and also on the role of European funds in financing the institutionalization of persons with disabilities across EU member states. So let me focus on EU as a global actor, and I would submit that there are many opportunities for the EU to promote and protect the rights of persons with disabilities through its engagements in multilateral fora and its relations with third countries. In fact, the Convention binds the European Union to make international cooperation and development programmes disability inclusive, Article 32, and to protect persons with disabilities in humanitarian emergencies, Article 11. The EU and its member states are collectively the biggest donor of development aid in the world and a major humanitarian donor, providing 36% of the global humanitarian assistance. Substantial support is also provided to neighbourhood and enlargement countries. The EU can and must make a real difference for persons with disabilities worldwide. This means ensuring that persons with disabilities are indeed included, consulted and targeted in international cooperation, as well as in civil protection and humanitarian aid operations. To be aligned with the Convention, it is key that the extensive investments made by the EU in third countries go towards initiatives promoting genuine community inclusion of persons with disabilities. This means investing in human rights-based support systems in the community, which include social protection support services, accessible infrastructure, as well as digital and assistive technologies. Funding a water well that is not accessible or an inaccessible school or bus shelter will keep persons with disabilities excluded from the community. We must avoid exporting the bad practice of segregating persons with disabilities and institutional care to third countries, and instead use international cooperation as a vehicle to promote deinstitutionalization. In emergency situations, people in institutions must not be overlooked, and emergency and recovery funding should not support institutionalization of persons with disabilities. Markus already made reference to the guidelines on deinstitutionalization, developed by the committee in 2022. So I will not go there, but those apply both during emergency situations, for example, such as pandemics and wars. At the multilateral level, the EU and its member states have a powerful voice that can be used to champion the rights of persons with disabilities at the global level. This ranges from ensuring that disability rights are included in global processes, in the Security Council, in the General Assembly, in the Human Rights Council, to support the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities, or to ensure the meaningful participation of persons with disabilities in decision-making processes and relevant fora. We have 6 years to go to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, and it is time we make a last-ditch effort to deliver on the promises made to end poverty, protect the planet, tackle inequalities, and leave no one behind. Much of the progress made in eradicating poverty has been reversed in the wake of COVID-19. Rising inflation, skyrocketing cost of living affect the most vulnerable. The brunt of this has been borne, of course, by those most left behind, a group of which includes persons with disabilities. In this context, it is welcome that the EU reported on its implementation of the SDGs and took part in the voluntary review process last year. On Monday, at the Summit of the Future in New York, world leaders adopted the Pact for the Future and the annexed Global Digital Compact and the Declaration on Future Generations. This is a commitment to multilateralism. There were concerns until the last day whether disability rights would be overlooked or whether they would be mainstreamed into the text. I'm happy to report that the tireless efforts of many stakeholders, including within the UN system and yourselves, representing organizations, I'm concluding, of persons with disabilities contributed to mainstreaming disability within the Pact. And let me just read one of the commitments to ensure inclusion of young persons with disabilities to attain and maintain maximum autonomy, independence and full inclusion and participation in all aspects of life, and invest in assistive technologies that can promote their full, effective and meaningful participation in society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Elena. I'm very glad that is opening the issue about disability to be not overlooked in the Voluntary Summit, but also I'm glad that you have mentioned and the military crisis and political crisis that's happening globally. So in that sense, I will ask Ms. Ioana Dermin, looking from your perspective, but having in mind that existing international humanitarian law is not in line with the CRPD, how you're observing the EU efforts in humanitarian aid in the alignment with the CRPD, and what actions should be included in the strategy and actions, but actually that can be managed by disability community. Please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to highlight what we do in terms of disability inclusion in humanitarian assistance, but also in terms of EU-supported actions. I think it was also said by the previous speaker, the EU remains committed to providing inclusive external assistance, and this is in line with our obligations under the CRPD. One thing that I think was already noted is that persons with disabilities are often disproportionately affected by a humanitarian crisis and natural disasters, and often they face barriers in order to access the assistance in a meaningful manner, and they remain amongst the most vulnerable. Therefore, for us, making such humanitarian assistance inclusive and accessible has been and will continue to be a key priority for the EU. I just want to highlight some of the action that has been taken in recent years and how we translate our commitments into action. We basically approach the issue from two main perspectives. Firstly, mainstreaming inclusivity in all projects relating to humanitarian assistance, but also providing for targeted assistance. Over the past years, we have observed a steady progress in terms of inclusiveness of our projects, and we report against the OECD marker on disability inclusion. Last year, for example, 50% of the funded projects took into consideration and mainstreamed the needs of persons with disabilities among other beneficiaries, and 6% of funded projects specifically targeted persons with disabilities. And this includes actions, for example, such as supporting inclusive education and accessible learning environments in numerous countries. And for example, I cite the situation in Syria, Sudan, Somalia, Bangladesh, the provision of rehabilitation services and of assistive devices in numerous countries, including, for example, Palestine, Yemen, Ukraine and Burkina Faso, and also, for example, disability top-ups in cash programs that we have implemented, for example, in Myanmar and Iran. An issue for us is data on disability, because we believe this remains essential. So for us, we require that humanitarian partners provide disaggregated data on disability in project proposals, and we also encourage the use of the Washington short set of questions as a standard data collection methodology. We also stress repeatedly that disability inclusion should not be the sole responsibility for specialized disability rights organizations, but it is and should remain a task for all humanitarian actors. And this is why we are encouraging our staff and partners to promote inclusion in EU-funded projects. We have developed in 2019 operational guidance on the inclusion of persons with disabilities in humanitarian projects, and we have a dedicated e-learning that was published last year in order to support the capacity building not only of our staff in DG ECHO, but also in terms of the capacity of our partners to deliver such inclusive projects. And we also pursue dialogue with local organizations of persons with disability. Advocacy is an important part also of what we do. So we organised in the context of the European Humanitarian Forum dedicated policy exchanges on disability inclusion in the past 2 editions. We supported...
The name of the time, sorry, because...
Okay, I will just to speak a little bit about the future, perhaps, in terms of also the question that was asked, what will we do in future? I think we have the basis of a number of work strands which we will continue to improve. We are starting to unpack the notion of intersectionality, which we believe is something that will help us further mainstream disability in all policies. And we have the upcoming Global Disability Summit in Berlin and the Regional Disability Summit in Berlin in December, where we will actively participate together with our partners in the development field.
Thank you, Ms. Joanna. A lot of activities, a lot of measures, and of course a lot of funds dedicated to management of the persons with disability in the who are actually and victims are in the crisis spaces or places globally. But how is happening? What is happening actually in the practice? And are those funds, what was talking about the Joanna, are managed by organizations of persons with disability? And what is going on with the process of the institutionalization? More about it will speak Ms. Julia Sachuk, Fight for Rights. She's coming for the organization Fight for Rights from Ukraine.
Thank you. And being here and speaking to you today is a big honor for me. And I'd like to thank ENIL and Nadia especially and all team to have this my European disability community. So dear disability community and colleagues, Russia is continuing killing us, but we continue fighting for Ukraine's victory and our future in the European Union of Equality. Among the 3 million of Ukrainians with disabilities, many joined defense of our country. Even more are volunteering, and many of us found refuge here in the European countries. And we found here not just safety, but also best practices of how to implement disability rights. And we will definitely implement them back home. But many of us also still continue to live in Ukraine under shelling, without electricity and heat during winters. We continue to fight. We continue to provide essential support for all Ukrainians with disabilities. Organization of People with Disabilities Fight for Right, which I lead, from the first days of the war, started unique emergency response led by people with disabilities. And our developments can be useful even for European countries how to build real disability inclusive crisis responses. We managed to make evacuation just usual community-based services. We know how to help people after flooding. We know how to make bomb shelters accessible. We know how to make digital applications accessible, which gives us safety. And with all of that, again, we are ready to share. We are starting doing this because big international organizations failed to provide such support. Even more, during these years, we also managed to receive public commitment from our government to start the institutionalization. Unfortunately, for now, we have 259 institutions in Ukraine and 38,000 of Ukrainians who are there. Near 8,000 of people are still receiving residential care in segregated services. In 2020, 22, 2023, more than 8,000 of Ukrainians are institutionalized, and 20 institutions still in occupied territories. And we don't know the clear number of people who are there and what happened with them. Last week, Russia bombed geriatric institution in Sumy and killed a lot of people who are elderly and with disabilities died there and were injured. And we once again call our authorities to immediately evacuate people, all people in all institutions from frontline regions. Also, we want to create precedent and to start the institutionalization with a real effective deinstitutionalization strategy developed in collaborative manner with our authorities during accession process. But unfortunately, very often in our advocacy negotiations, I hear argument, you know, Yulia, I have visited this and that EU country and institution perfectly exists there. So the deinstitutionalization and absence of institutions in the European countries will help us to strengthen our movement in this direction. And regarding international support, war showed us how non-disability inclusive international development and humanitarian support is. Only after 2 years and a lot of procedures and tens of thousands of effectively provided support for Ukrainians with disabilities through our national mechanism, we were managed to become first organization of people with disabilities partner to the Ukrainian Humanitarian Fund, which was established in 2019 and have more than 100 organizations. We were the first organization of persons with disabilities. And I don't know any international donor in Ukraine who are prioritizing deinstitutionalization and independent living. We also hope that after the first after-war elections in Ukraine, we will have more disability leaders in decision-making processes and our political life, because now most of decisions in high level are made without our participation. I remember very well.
Thank you, Joanna. Sorry.
Yeah, the last sentence. I remember very well first days of the war and incredible support, most of which was from disability community, many from European countries. And I want to thank you for that support. We will continue to our fight to our right to belong there. Thank you.
you, Joanna. Thank you that you have mentioned, enlightened with Elena and Miss Joanna about the requirements that the process of deinstitutionalization need to continue no matter what we have crisis or no in the world. But also thank you very much all you have mentioned and about data which are in line and with Ms. Joanna that data considering disability are very important, especially in the crisis as you have mentioned that war actually is generating disability that probably will generate in the new disability generation which probably will be not so soft and diplomatic as we are at this moment. But we are talking a lot about the inclusion, involvement, or what we will preaching in the morning in the protests and yelling, nothing without us. What's happening with that nothing without us and the inclusion, disability movement, where we are, and what proposal shall we send to the next phase of the European Disability Strategy. Will tell us more about it, Mr. Gordon Rattray.
Thank you very much. I'll start by saying that someone once told me that realisation of Article 19 of the CRPD is as close as we can get to realisation of the CRPD in itself. Now, you are all better placed than I am to judge whether that's true, but I think it's very clear that Article 19 is absolutely fundamental. And we've heard today, this is my first freedom drive as well, and I've heard today so much evidence of how people with disabilities in the EU are segregated, living in institutional settings. And this is one of the wealthiest regions of the world. So how is the situation in countries of the world where, which have much less income and where perhaps human rights is not so fundamental? And as European Disability Forum, we have several recommendations. In the interest of time, I will focus on some of the key points that have been mentioned, but maybe dig down a little bit more detail into them and not repeat some of the other points that were mentioned. So the first thing I would say is that there has to be increased funding to deinstitutionalisation, to closing institutions, and no money, no cents to go towards rebuilding, refurbishing or building new institutional settings. At the same time as that very specific request to programmatic work, all EU funding going to third countries, going outside the EU, also should be done through a lens of Article 19. So the work towards accession, EU accession, towards humanitarian action, towards climate change, and specific things like mass transportation and built infrastructure have all got huge opportunities to make sure that people with disabilities can live independently in the community. And I'll pick up on one point that was talked about with humanitarian action. It's also the situation, and we've seen it in Ukraine, in our work in Ukraine, and I'm sure Yulia has also seen it, where new institutional settings are being created, where there are inaccessible temporary shelters for people who are internally displaced in Ukraine, and therefore people with disabilities have been put into what should have been closed institutions, apparently temporarily, but probably for long term and potentially for in permanent situations. Regarding participation of organisations of persons with disabilities, people with disabilities through their representative organisations, this has to be done at all stages, from the very beginning until the very end of any programmatic work. And the key point here is to make sure that these organisations have got the resources and the funding to participate as equal partners. First thing is to ask them at the beginning, do you want to be involved? What do you require in order to be involved as equal partners? If this doesn't happen, those organisations will be there in the typical old checkbox manner of being there in the room but not able to participate. And then to mention a topic that I'm hearing more and more about, which is the so-called implementation gap. I don't know if you've seen this coming up more and more, but for me, it's clearly relevant. We have lots of good policy, which I've mentioned and others have mentioned, lots of good technical advice and guidelines available, but we don't see things happening on the ground as fast as they should. So we need to strengthen the monitoring, the evaluation and the learning processes that are in place. They need to become stronger. We need to track funding. That tracking needs to be transparent. And we need to have indicators that don't just suggest to partners that they report on persons with disabilities, number of persons with disabilities, but that they oblige partners, that these indicators must be unambiguous. That means that partners must say, we are reaching this number of persons with disabilities, and within this population of persons with disabilities, we have reached the diversity of people with disabilities, especially those who are most marginalised, including women and children, and making sure that they are not just reached, but that they are actively involved in the planning stages. Data disaggregation is crucial. And then 2 more points regarding EU opportunities, and maybe this touches on the awareness raising that was raised earlier. The EU being one of the biggest donor, together with its member states in the world, has the opportunity to provide support to local governments, to civil society and to service providers in third countries, to provide them with technical assistance and training, and to identify good practice and scale up and scale out that good practice. It also has the opportunity in its diplomacy work to increase implementation of Article 19 where it is not yet being done so in those countries. Also in its work with trade agreements and foreign aid and the human rights dialogues to bring in Article 19 into all of this work, to make sure that all of those activities which are not focused on independent living for persons with disabilities address indirectly the topic, making sure that institutions are closed and that services are provided at the same time. So in summary, Article 19 may be the one that is key to ensure that the CRPD is in place. I leave that open for others to decide, but it's crucial to keep it in mind in all EU activities in third countries. And the last point,
thank you, Mr. Gordon.
Institutions.
Thank you for your highlighting the issue about the cooperation, data, and of course, you have mentioned funding and external actions, which is leading us to Mr. Elias Matthews, head of the division within the European External Actions. How do you see the moments or activities that need to be undertaken in the methodology for EOA session in line with the CRPD, and of course how can be CRPD mainstream within other external actions that the EU is undertaking globally and in regional level?
Thank you. So perhaps I ought to explain that I'm the head of the Human Rights Division in the European External Action Service. So we look at this from the point of view of putting human rights at the centre of EU foreign policy. So I'm probably not the right person to talk in a specialist way about enlargement, but I can come to it in some of the things that I say. So I would very much echo what Elena and Joanna said. I mean, the EU is positioned multilaterally, internationally as an advocate for the rights-based approach to disability. That means that independent living is central to the way in which we work on the global stage. So that's outside the European Union. And how do we do that? We have our own role in implementing the EU strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities. That means also delivering on the commitments that were taken at the 2022 Global Disability Summit. It means that we are supposed to put the issues that you've been referring to in the political dialogues and the human rights dialogues that the EAS leads on behalf of the European Union with third countries around the world. I can give examples of where we've done that with countries in all regions of the world, with Argentina and Brazil, with the United States, with China, with Vietnam, for example. And we then obviously look at that from the point of view of the commitments that those countries have taken under the CRPD themselves, but also through Human Rights Council processes like UPR. Elena said it, but we are central to advocacy on behalf of making sure that human rights and indeed the rights of persons with disabilities are reflected very clearly, not only in the Summit for the Future and the Pact for the Future, which has just been adopted, but also the Global Digital Compact. I encourage you to look at those documents and see how you can build upon them. And then I guess the question that might be most interesting for you is, what do we think that we could work on in the coming period where, as many of you pointed out, we're in a situation of political transition, and therefore anchoring human rights in EU policies is an important thing to talk about as we go through that transition. And some of the things that I would like to point to are the Global Disability Summit coming up in Berlin in 2025, and there I think we as the EAS will be looking to support the Commission to move from a momentum-building exercise to looking at concrete implementation of commitments. We will have, as the EAS, to work with the Commission on the equality agenda, which you mentioned, which is in the mission letters of the incoming Vice Presidents and Commissioners under the new College. It may not say as much as you would like it to, but those letters do actually already say a lot. They talk about the full implementation of the EU's own strategy, but also the implementation of the CRPD as a central part of what the EU does internally and externally. I entirely agree with my DG ECHO colleague about needing to take a fresh look at intersecting forms of discrimination, and that is why the CRPD talks about equality between men and women. It also talks about respect for the evolving capacities of children with disabilities. It was said before, I think I see it more as an opportunity than as a challenge, but the EU will be reviewed under the CRPD, and that is an opportunity, I think, through the consultations that you have that were outlined, to give input in a way which will lead to tough questions being asked of the EU, and that will lead to recommendations to the Commission, the ES and other colleagues for further action. We need ourselves, as the EAS, which manages the EU's network of 140 or more delegations around the world, we need to look at opportunities for our delegations in third countries to do public advocacy on behalf of the rights of persons with disabilities. And we also need to look at how we reflect that in the country-specific human rights and democracy action plans that we have. And then finally, I want to draw attention to something which I think deserved mention at the beginning, which is that the political guidelines that you referred to in the mission letters very clearly talk about enhancing the EU institutions' dialogue with civil society. I think you can very much be part of that. And the opportunity that I would like to focus on is that we're now moving in, after its extension this year for 3 extra years, into the final period of the EU's Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy. That's the roadmap that we use for putting human rights into EU foreign policy. Why is it important? Because it runs concurrently with the next multi-annual financial framework. And if you want that to reflect the lessons learned on the implementation or not of the CRPD, work with us on the action plan, and that should then be reflected in the programming. So, a few recommendations.
Thank you very much. I hope we are going to see and take an action by your side to mainstream disability more frequently and to talk about disability. As a deputy and member of the Commission for Regional Development, Mr. Malulu, what suggestion you will propose in the light of CRPD to accelerate the right for independent living and implementation of the human rights model for disability community within the regional development process?
Chairperson, thank you very much, and my compliments to the work that is going on with regard to the future plans, particularly by the Commission. I am a member of the Parliament, a new member of the Parliament, but I come to you today to speak to you briefly as a boat builder. I build boats. In 2015, I started a process to build something called the Loughree Access for All boat. In my country, in Ireland, there was no boat onto which a person with a disability using a wheelchair could roll on and roll off themselves. No boat. They must be lifted, they must be hoisted, their own privacy, their own independence immediately challenged by that situation. My friend Dorothy, a wheelchair user, said to us, "What is the big deal? Why can we not change this? Why can we not design a boat ourselves? Stop complaining that people are not doing something for you. Do it ourselves. Take on the project." Dorothy said to me, "We can design the boat. This is not rocket science. We need a boat with a bow which goes down, like a car ferry. That's all we need. We need a boat where we can wheel on and wheel off, retain our independence and proceed." We manufactured the boat in Estonia. It cost €175,000 to produce. Today, it is the only licensed boat in Britain and Ireland which carries out this facility. I tell this to you today as just a story about the importance of the power of one in the global situation. Going forward in the European Parliament, as one MEP, I will work with my colleagues to my left and my right today in terms of ensuring that the support is there for the principles you need. Disability is created by the barriers often erected by our society. So we must work harder in this Parliament to dismantle those barriers, to create rights on a level equal to others. This means that people with disability must have full access to the regular labour market, must have full access to mainstream education, and must have full access to political participation. You must be the power of one. You must join us at the top table. You must join us in the Parliament. There must be more than one female in the Parliament with disability. We heard that today. So I come to you today to say, as a new person starting out, I will work to this cause in the coming years. I will work as a new MEP. I will pledge my support to this campaign, for this, the 11th edition of this Freedom Fight campaign, because it started in 2003 in Strasbourg at the initiative of a man from my country, Martin Naughton from Ireland, a man with a remarkable story, living in institutions for quite some time of it, but a person who came out and started a new movement. I wish you well with the rest of your proceedings today, and I will tell you, I will stand beside you, I will support you in the Parliament going forward to prove that the power of one can be a very powerful force. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malulu. Mr. Sanden also is a deputy. He is part of several committees. So from your perspective, how can be mainstream disability in all of these actions undertaken by the different committees? Because we have seen different applies or different instruction when it comes to disability.
Thank you, and thank you first of all for the initiative to this hearing. I think that's very important. Before I was elected, I'm newly elected as well to the Parliament. I was a member of a city council in Denmark, where I live. We spent 1 year with politicians and with people with disabilities and experts to discuss how do we make a stronger policy for people with disabilities. And I think that's an important point, that we shall do it together with people who know more than we know about what the problems are, which barriers they meet with. And I never learned so much in my political life, which is quite long, as this year. And what we learned was, as you said, every kind of access, every kind of availability is important. In every aspect of the life. Second, it's very important to make connections with civil societies, that you can participate like everyone else participates. It's very
important, as you also said, with job and education. But not only that, we have to form jobs where people who cannot participate 100%, but can do it 10, 20, 30, 40%, have a job where they get a salary which is a salary like the ones who can work 100%. We have an agreement like that in Denmark. The same with education. We have to be aware of that some people are not able to finish their education as quick as others. Then we have to make for them longer educations so they can educate themselves to jobs they want. We have to be very much aware also of the way case management is done, the way you are treated when you meet the public system. It's not only always a very nice picture we heard about. And then just to finish a bit about deinstitutionalization. We had since the 80s an arrangement where you could employ your own helpers as a person with disabilities. You could find someone who could help you with the needs which had been defined. Today we're in a situation that these are being cut. And it's not fair when you make deinstitutionalization, which I think is a good idea. We started in the 17th, and I think it brought the greatest progress we ever saw. But you cannot do that first and then afterwards cut the support which is needed in the home. I think that's very important. So just to finish, I think we have to do as rich societies, and we are part of the richest societies on this earth, what we can do. And I do not accept the argument that it's too expensive. We are richer than we have ever been. It's a question about political will, if we are willing to share this in a way that also gives hopes and chances for people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sandel. Of course, everything is a political will. That's why we are here to reclaiming our rights now. To reclaiming, in the same time, our stories to be part of the humankind histories. We had, I think, in more than enough patience. And because of we are limited with the time, I will give a speech to address Mr. Katrin Langensiepen MEP as giving a closing remarks.
Thank you. 30 seconds. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening. Thanks for protesting. See you tonight at the party. See you later.
May I say just a thanks to all. I will just say that before this, we should not forget our fighters, comrades, who have started this road and shaped our future decades ago, and today they are not with us. Finally, I would like to thank to ENIL staff members and the youth who passionately work for this freedom drive to be remarkable, unifying and spreading the message that we should unite, stand up for our rights and become the new game changers in the new world of democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.